Today we're talking about different types of myths that we're going to encounter as we work through world mythology. So, in general, a myth is a story shared by a group of people and it's part of the cultural identity of the group. When we talk about mythology, we're talking about a collection of such stories that form a system based in a particular culture or society. So, Greek mythology, Norse mythology, Chinese mythology. So, it's a group of myths from a certain society that created and holds those myths. So, why do we study myths and what are their purpose? So, mythology started as a way to answer the big questions that we didn't necessarily have answers for. How did we get here? What happens when we die? Why is there lightning? Why is there the tide? Things like that, that before science we didn't have answers to. But it also explains traditional customs, beliefs, and values that exist. So, why do we have these rituals, or why do we do these sacrifices, or why do we have these traditions? So the first type of myth is the creation myth. This explains how the earth came to be. These myths often involve gods or animals, struggles between forces, and a lot of times the death of this god or animal forms the universe, the earth, the world, the mountains, whatever it is, everything in it, and how it came to be. Next, we have nature myths. These just explain natural phenomena, so thunder, the tide, trees, day and night, whatever it is, we're explaining things in nature. A theogenic myth attempts to explain the relationships between gods and creatures in a system of mythology. So, why do the gods rule over humans? Or why are cows sacred in Hinduism? Or why are, why do we treat these animals this way? Or why do we have reverence for these plants? Because, this god likes it, or something like that. Folklore isn't necessarily a type of myth, but it is an oral tradition. So this is when myths aren't necessarily written down, but they're told and passed down from generation to generation orally. So prayers, proverbs, expressions, superstitions, beliefs, things like that. All of these are things that aren't necessarily written down somewhere, but it's passed down through their culture. That's folklore. And then legends are myths that involve mortal people, human beings, as the main character. They may be mentioned in written history, and there's not necessarily evidence that they're completely true. So they could be based in truth, they could be completely made up, they could be true, we don't know. So things like King Arthur, or Robin Hood, or Hercules, these are all things where this person might have actually existed. We don't know how much of this is true and how much of this is fake, but the main character is a human and it could have been a real person. Folk tales are similar to folklore, but at some point they were written down. So they were passed down orally from generation to generation, and then at some point someone wrote them down. And they're generally reflective of the culture they came from and contain universal themes. So they may not have to explain something, but it's a story about a god or goddess or part of this mythology that was passed down and eventually written down. A fable is a type of folktale, and this involves talking animals, and it's to illustrate a moral. A lot of times these are more for children. So like the Three Little Pigs would be a fable, like it's telling you that hard work pays off through these talking animals. And then a morality tale is to caution the reader about dangerous situations. They don't state the moral as clearly, it's a little more disguised, but it's still to teach you a lesson. So, for example, Little Red Riding Hood, something we can take away from that is listen to adults, and when they give you warnings, you should heed those warnings. And it doesn't ever say that in there, but that's definitely the moral of the story. And then a fairy tale. It's a type of folk tale, and it usually takes place long ago and far away. Usually it involves someone who is a royal, like a princess or a prince or a king. They are tested and they have magical assistance. And in fairy tales, they always have a happy ending. Good always wins over evil. There's definitely going to be a happily ever after. So those are some of the types of myths that we're going to talk about in mythology.